A 150-meter industrial deep-sea fishing vessel leaves port at dawn, beginning its hunt for the giant Pacific sailfish.
American male industrial fishermen secure their harnesses and safety lines before entering the offshore giant Pacific sailfish grounds.
Inside the wheelhouse, the American male industrial fishing captain traces migration routes of the giant Pacific sailfish across the chart table. On deck, hydraulic longline drums are tested, their power critical for controlling a hooked giant Pacific sailfish at full speed.
American male industrial fishermen lay out heavy-gauge hooks specifically sized for the narrow bill strikes of the giant Pacific sailfish.
Baiting begins as baitfish are threaded carefully onto each hook, tailored to trigger the speed attack of the giant Pacific sailfish. Roller assemblies are inspected to ensure smooth line travel when a giant Pacific sailfish drives the long line into sudden tension.
The captain briefs the American male industrial fisherman on the sailfish's blistering acceleration and violent changes of direction.
First baited section of longline is staged along the rail, each hook a potential connection to a giant Pacific sailfish.
Longline feeders engage as the 150-meter vessel maintains speed, allowing the baited line to peel steadily into the Pacific.
Tension gauges are checked and recalibrated to absorb the shock loads generated by a charging giant Pacific sailfish. Additional longline sections slide over the roller, forming a drifting highway of bait that will intersect giant Pacific sailfish patrol routes. With the spread deployed, sonar and navigation systems lock into search mode over prime giant Pacific sailfish habitat. Underwater, a distant giant Pacific sailfish silhouette glides into view, its long body cutting through the blue haze.
The towering sail of the giant Pacific sailfish unfurls slightly, purple-blue rays shimmering in filtered light. The giant Pacific sailfish cruises parallel to the depths, its streamlined body leaving a narrow wake through suspended particles. A flash of silver reflects from the bill tip as the giant Pacific sailfish tilts its head to survey the water column.
With a controlled sweep, the giant Pacific sailfish angles its body toward the distant line of suspended bait.
A powerful tail stroke launches the giant Pacific sailfish forward, compressing water into a thin pressure trail behind it.
The giant Pacific sailfish raises its sail further, the massive fin casting a long shadow across the blue void. Droplets of silt swirl aside as the giant Pacific sailfish dips lower, its movement disturbing the calm midwater layer.
Subtle color shifts travel along the flanks of the giant Pacific sailfish as it rolls slightly to one side.
The giant Pacific sailfish advances toward the bait, bill drawing a straight line through the quiet water.
Slowing, the giant Pacific sailfish hovers near the bait cluster, its eye locked on the drifting hooks. The giant Pacific sailfish angles its long bill precisely toward a single bait, positioning for a surgical strike. A sudden upward burst from the giant Pacific sailfish compresses the water above it, pushing bubbles aside in a tight column. The giant Pacific sailfish drives diagonally toward the upper layers, turning the deep blue around it into streaked motion lines. At the surface, a sharp V-shaped wake appears as the unseen giant Pacific sailfish runs just below the waves.
A narrow strip of dorsal sail from the giant Pacific sailfish slices briefly through the surface before vanishing again.
The surface above the longline erupts as the giant Pacific sailfish tears across it, carving a long, white-tipped V-wake. A flash of blue-purple dorsal sail from the giant Pacific sailfish slices through the waves before vanishing again. The giant Pacific sailfish slashes sideways near the surface, its tail sending a diagonal sheet of spray down the wave face. Running just below the chop, the giant Pacific sailfish drags a razor-straight line of disturbed water across the swells. A brutal turn from the giant Pacific sailfish twists the surface into a funnel-shaped whirl, foam spiraling at the edge of the wake. The bill of the giant Pacific sailfish breaks the surface for a heartbeat, knifing through air before plunging back into the swell.
Without warning, the giant Pacific sailfish explodes fully from the water in a towering breach, scattering spray in every direction.
A second, higher breach follows as the giant Pacific sailfish twists midair, its sail flaring wide before crashing back into the sea.
The giant Pacific sailfish sprints away at full speed, sail fully erect, carving a blade-straight path that drags the longline sideways.
The bill of the giant Pacific sailfish collides with the tension line, sending a violent resonance up the cable into the vessel's frame. The longline bucks upward as the giant Pacific sailfish hooks solidly, turning raw speed into crushing tension on the system. American male industrial fishermen surge to the rail, harness clips locking onto anchor points as they prepare to fight the giant Pacific sailfish.
The giant Pacific sailfish drags the longline in a brutal lateral run, forcing the 150-meter vessel to yaw slightly off course.
The roller groans under load while the cable cuts a groove of spray across the starboard side, tethered to the giant Pacific sailfish below. A counterpull from the fishermen begins to gain ground, inching the giant Pacific sailfish back toward the vessel. The giant Pacific sailfish tries to dive, forcing the line to saw dangerously along the corner roller of the 150-meter vessel. Hydraulic brakes are slammed into high resistance, slowing the giant Pacific sailfish's dive and stabilizing the longline.
Forced upward, the giant Pacific sailfish churns the surface, its tail blasting white water as it fights against the pull.
Confirmation comes over the deck. Hook set, giant Pacific sailfish locked, and the crew shifts fully into heavy haul mode.
The giant Pacific sailfish makes one last attempt to dive, pulling the cable down in a dangerous arc toward the sea.
The brake holds, and the longline begins to rise, hauling the giant Pacific sailfish relentlessly back toward the surface. Dark blue water boils as the head of the giant Pacific sailfish nears the surface, bill slicing below the foam. The bill of the giant Pacific sailfish breaks through first, thrashing side to side as the body follows in a surge.
With a wrenching pull, the upper body of the giant Pacific sailfish clears the waves, water cascading from its flanks.
The dorsal sail of the giant Pacific sailfish folds tight against its body as lift forces overcome its remaining strength.
The gaff is driven cleanly into a safe anchoring point, giving the fishermen extra leverage against the giant Pacific sailfish's final lunges. The crane hook is clipped into heavy slings wrapped beneath the giant Pacific sailfish's midsection.
Hydraulic power surges to the crane, beginning the main lift that will tear the giant Pacific sailfish free of the ocean.
The giant Pacific sailfish rises slowly, tail still beating, body dripping as it swings away from the waves.
Guide ropes stretch tight as American male industrial fishermen control the swinging mass of the giant Pacific sailfish.
Fully clear of the sea, the giant Pacific sailfish hangs against the sky, its size finally visible from bill to tail.
The crane boom creaks under the shifting weight as the giant Pacific sailfish is slewed slowly toward the central deck.
The giant Pacific sailfish is lowered onto rubber-padded mats, its body landing with a heavy, final impact.
Water streams away from the giant Pacific sailfish, pooling around its flanks and running into deck scuppers.
A heavy rope loop is thrown over the bill of the giant Pacific sailfish, securing its head firmly to the tie-down points.
The tail of the giant Pacific sailfish gives a final, weak slap against the steel, echoing across the deck.
Measuring tape is drawn from bill tip to tail fork, revealing the full record-breaking length of the giant Pacific sailfish. The enormous dorsal sail of the giant Pacific sailfish is lifted gently and measured from base to tip.
African-American fishermen rinse the giant Pacific sailfish with seawater to remove loose scales and sediment from the hard-fought battle.
The hook is removed carefully from the giant Pacific sailfish's jaw, preserving both the gear and the valuable specimen.
The detached longline section is coiled neatly beside the rail, cleared away from the giant Pacific sailfish's resting place.
The underside of the giant Pacific sailfish is examined for damage, revealing scars from deep ocean encounters.
A crane-mounted scale is clipped into the sling, weighing the giant Pacific sailfish as it lifts a few centimeters off the mats.
The recorded weight confirms the giant Pacific sailfish as one of the season's largest longline catches.
The dorsal sail of the giant Pacific sailfish is inspected ray by ray, its structure a blueprint of speed and control.
Ice blankets are dragged across the deck, and spread over the giant Pacific sailfish to begin cooling its body.
Fins and tail of the giant Pacific sailfish are positioned carefully to avoid damage during transport to market.
Documentation photos of the giant Pacific sailfish are taken from multiple angles for scientific and commercial records.
Tags are attached to the giant Pacific sailfish, linking its capture data to international stock assessments.
A reinforced cradle is positioned alongside the giant Pacific sailfish to support its weight during transfer ashore. The giant Pacific sailfish is inched into the cradle using short crane lifts and careful deck handling.
Straps cinch over the giant Pacific sailfish, locking it securely into the cradle for offloading at port.
At the auction hall, the giant Pacific sailfish arrives in its cradle, drawing immediate attention from buyers.
South Asian inspectors evaluate the giant Pacific sailfish, checking flesh firmness, color, and sail integrity under bright market lights.
The final hammer falls and the giant Pacific sailfish is sold, destined for premium culinary use.
Processors transfer the giant Pacific sailfish to a chilled cutting area, ready to break it down into exportable sections.
Large loins are cut from the giant Pacific sailfish, trimmed to remove thick skin and external damage from the fight.
Processed giant Pacific sailfish portions are stacked into insulated crates lined with flaked ice. Each crate of giant Pacific sailfish is weighed and labeled, linking it to the auction lot and catch location. Forklifts move the loaded crates of giant Pacific sailfish into a waiting refrigerated container for transport. A sealed container of giant Pacific sailfish joins a line of outbound reefers, each unit a link in the global cold chain. Shipping data for the giant Pacific sailfish container is logged, synchronizing ocean freight with the destination restaurant schedule.
At the receiving port, the giant Pacific sailfish container is offloaded from a cargo vessel and placed in a refrigerated yard.
A refrigerated truck couples to the giant Pacific sailfish container, locking in the final overland leg of its journey.
At the high-end restaurant, dock doors open as the giant Pacific sailfish shipment rolls in from the truck.
The restaurant's cold storage team, composed of a Hispanic man in his 50s and a Caucasian woman in her 20s, checks the...
Inside the chilled prep area, the giant Pacific sailfish loins are lifted onto a central stainless prep table.
The South Asian male head chef inspects giant Pacific sailfish loin color, firmness, and aroma, confirming its premium quality.
Assistant chefs weigh individual giant Pacific sailfish cuts to standardize portion sizes for upcoming services.
Sashimi-grade giant Pacific sailfish sections are separated into dedicated trays, distinct from cuts destined for grilling.
Chefs begin trimming membranes from giant Pacific sailfish cuts, refining each piece for clean texture on the plate.
Excess fat and uneven edges are removed from the giant Pacific sailfish loins, leaving uniform blocks for preparation. A small test slice of giant Pacific sailfish is marinated briefly to evaluate flavor absorption and salt balance. Two Caucasian chefs adjust seasoning plans based on the giant Pacific sailfish test sample, fine-tuning future recipes. High-value giant Pacific sailfish cuts are portioned into service-ready sizes, each piece tailored to a specific dish.
Vacuum-sealed bags are prepared as the giant Pacific sailfish portions are laid flat to ensure even chilling and storage.
A vacuum machine seals giant Pacific sailfish portions in airtight packages, locking in deep ocean freshness.
Labels are printed and applied to each giant Pacific sailfish package, detailing origin, catch method, and date. Vacuum-sealed giant Pacific sailfish portions are organized by service day, creating a precise usage schedule for the kitchen. Storage racks fill with giant Pacific sailfish packages, each positioned for quick retrieval during peak service hours.
A portion of giant Pacific sailfish is moved from cold storage to a staging fridge for the evening's tasting menu. African-American prep staff arrange giant Pacific sailfish cuts on a chilled tray, ready for final transformation in the kitchen.
For sashimi service, the head chef slices giant Pacific sailfish into impossibly thin, translucent strips.
At the grill station, seasoned giant Pacific sailfish steaks sear hard, edges caramelizing under intense heat.
Plating begins as giant Pacific sailfish slices are paired with citrus elements and delicate microgreens.
A signature dish featuring giant Pacific sailfish steak is finished with a glossy reduction and precise garnish placement.
In the dining room, a guest lifts the first bite of giant Pacific sailfish sashimi, tasting the journey from deep ocean to plate.
Another guest cuts into a giant Pacific sailfish steak, revealing a moist interior beneath the seared crust.
Reactions around the room praise the giant Pacific sailfish for its clean flavor and firm, satisfying texture.
From longline battle to refined cuisine, the giant Pacific sailfish completes its passage through a global ocean economy.